Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and Devil's Reign, issue number 2. It's a pretty good book. I mean, I got some suggestions, but that's not really what I'm here for. I'm here to review the damn thing. So let's do that. First, let's give credit where credit's due. So we got Devil's Reign Part 2, writer Chip Zdarsky, artist Marco Cecchetto, color artist Marcio Menez, and letters Clayton Cowles, cover artist Cecchetto and Matthew Wilson. And there's a couple of variant covers out there, including the evil John Romita Jr. Anyway, let's get going from there. Also, for the second conversation, Chip Zdarsky is going to be writing a Batman thing again, a new thing, Batman the Night with a K. Yeah. Anyway, just in case you're curious and you're following Zdarsky, well, then you probably already know because you get his newsletter, like me. This this issue was pretty good. I I gotta admit, I'm sitting here reading this thing, and there's just so much happening. It genuinely feels like a large scale event, and it's just a mini event. Marvel said they were going to be doing these things, and much unlike DC, when DC says, "Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do all these things," they never really do them. They last for a little while, and it's like, pff, bye. It's like a wet fart. It's like, oh, attracts some attention, but then it just clears the damn room because nobody's going to wait around and see what that one smells like. With Marvel, they're still doing these mini events years later, which is fantastic. I don't need to buy 4,000 different comic books. I could just buy the Devil's Reign series, right? And I don't have to buy the new Spider-Woman coming out or the Villains for Hire or the Luke Cage City of Fire or whatever the hell that thing is called. But I might. But I might. This is a really good story. When you have little distractions like Danny Rand showing up, it's like I don't have anything to do for Danny Rand. So how about I just do something small that makes him look like an absolute badass against overwhelming odds? Yes, I'm down with that. Now I know there's going to be that rare Iron Fist aficionado who's just like, he's the greatest character ever. Sabretooth first appeared in his book. I know. But come on, right? He's not a major player. Zdarsky didn't have a whole lot to do with him. It would really suck if he used Luke Cage, and he's got a lot to do with Luke Cage in this series, right? But not even mention Danny Rand, just some off-camera thing like, oh, Danny's out of town. This isn't something he would come back for? With all of his building, he owns like 4 city blocks worth of buildings? Come on. Yeah, he would definitely be around. So I'm glad that something like this happened. I know there's going to be the people who say, like, oh, he's handled far more enemies than that. Well, at least they did something really cool with him. He went out fighting. That's better than I can say with most comics and most stories and most characters, with most writers. Elektra shows up to handle the Kingpin, but we see right away that not only is it going to go one of two ways, but it's going to go one of two ways really, really terribly for somebody. Because she stands there and she looks like she's ready to go. She's gotten past security and everything, but she pulls out her blunted size. Remember one of the best solo series ever made, Elektra Assassin? Yeah, it's hard to be an assassin with a blunted sigh, you know? So, excuse me if I sigh that it was far better that this happened, what happened in this comic, than anything else that would have happened, a fight or anything along those lines. I don't need to see Kingpin run one of her sighs through her while he's holding her up like that. I don't need to see that. I don't need to see her killing him or beating him or whatever. I don't need to see any of that nonsense. This was perfect. And I say it's perfect because when you think about it, what happened, I'm not going to just sit here and spoil everything, but what happened in the comic book between Elektra and the Kingpin, it tells of a larger story being told back in the Daredevil comic. And I'm really, I don't know, I'm not fatherly with Chip Zdarsky, but for crying out loud, like I'm proud of what Chip did in this. Really creative, really great way to put a character out of the way. And one way to bring a character into the story, listen, I remember I kind of railed on the idea that Luke Cage is an inspirational character, but him doing a speech is not usually the biggest deal in the world, right? Nobody's going to top the popularity of Steve Rogers. And if somebody does top the popularity of Steve Rogers, then the person writing that does not understand comic books and probably never will. It's just one of those weird things. But you can't always go with the same cliche of Steve Rogers is going to run for, like, Steve Rogers ran for president. Now he's going to run for the freaking mayor of New York. Come on. He's going to be hanging out in Gracie Mansion. Hi, look at my shield. No. Can you imagine that? Right? Mayor Rogers? No. And the idea of Tony Stark running for mayor was interesting, but I got to admit, the idea of Luke running, they did the speech for an obvious reason, and they explain it here very easily. On top of that, the popularity of being well known is one thing. You could be infamous. That doesn't mean you're popular. You're infamous. Like, people are afraid of you, right? Or they want to kill you when they see you. That's kind of like the Tony Stark heat. He's got like X-Pac heat, if anybody gets that reference from wrestling. So Luke Cage showing up, and just his word alone is better than $1,000 being wire transferred to you, Interact e-transfer if you're up here in Canada. I thought that was actually pretty cool. I dug on that. Now, mind you, I am conscientious of the idea that this was very contrived for the comic books. If you've only read Luke Cage in the comic books, well, then frickin' A. But if you're not going to see him as being that character who, I can see him being in charge. No, I can't. I can't see him being in charge just from the comic books. But it brings me back to the Luke Cage Netflix series, in which case he could have ran for mayor and he could win with a level of popularity that he has, right? People dig this guy, very much unlike all the other Defenders characters, the Netflix Defenders characters. I dug on this a lot. I really like the idea that, this kind of had that turn of events. And the idea that there's somebody hiding in the bushes and looking on. That's interesting. Now, one of the problems that I had in here, first off, one of the problems that I did have was, whose finger is that in Wilson Fisk's crystal? Because that seemed a little odd. There's somebody's finger in there, right? Now, did that happen in the previous issue? Did that happen in one of the issues of Daredevil that I simply didn't read? Sorry, I can't read everything. It would have been nice if there was a little reference to find that finger, go back to Daredevil issue number or wherever the hell that happened, right? Whose finger is that? I want to know. Inquiring minds want to know. Case in point, they did do a reference in here to an old book, a book that you'll hopefully find on the shelves. What was it? Marvel graphic novel issue number 27, Emperor Doom. It was a really good one. I remember reading it. But I saw it on here, and immediately in my mind, I'm like, oh, they told me to read this. I got to get my hands on this comic book. So now I just got to get my hands on the comic book. Oh, hi. Thank you. Thank you. Imagine that. But that's what happens when you're interested in something and they tell you, go read this. You go read it. That's just how it works, and everybody knows this. Any mind knows this. As an example of what not to do in that tone, Ben Reilly is Spider-Man again. I haven't been reading Spider-Man. I didn't know Ben Reilly became Spider-Man again. You know a cute little thing that they used to do back in the day when comics were always amazing? Amazing Spider-Man. See what I did there? Pun unintended, but welcome. They would put something like a little text blurb on the bottom. Hey, kids, you guys have been reading, or you guys have been keeping up with the current issues of Spider-Man, right? Just something along those lines, and then put a little witty, whoever the editor is, like if it's Devon's, like, Devon's Reign. You know what I'm saying? Just put something like that. Like, how great would that be? Just something stupid like that just lets you know, oh, shoot, Because worst case or best case scenario, you're probably gonna have some old fan like me, and you're like, Ben Riley's Spider-Man again? Wow. Okay, I haven't been reading Spider-Man. I think I need to change it. Let me go and check out what's going on. Or they have no idea who this blonde-haired guy is, calling himself Ben Riley, because everybody in the world knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. It's not even Miles Morales, for crying out loud. It's heartbreaking to see stuff like that. Don't let stuff like that bypass. It gets a little bit worse. I like what happened with Ben Riley in this. I didn't expect it, right? But it could have been one of those situations where you could have made both of them just a little bit smarter. I'm talking about Taskmaster, forget about Whiplash, right? But the idea of Taskmaster and Ben Riley, you could have made them just a little bit better. Case in point, when Taskmaster is sitting there talking about, oh, I've seen tapes and blah, 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 what it only makes sense that rather than watching him and using his photographic reflexes that way, would it be better if he'd already memorized Spider-Man's moves? Already. And he sees Spider-Man moving, and he's just like, all right, but, I'm ready for it. He goes to, it's like, here, killing blow, ha! It's like, you dodge it. How'd you dodge it? Because this is Ben Riley. And even though it's a clone of Peter Parker, it's not actually Peter Parker. Just look at the hair. Look at the hair. No, seriously. I know it's dyed. But at the end of the day, you look at this dude, and it's like, you could just do something different with him. You could have Peter, or have Miles in, oh my God, have Ben in here going, ha, he thinks I'm Peter. That gives me an advantage, but it's only going to be for about a minute or two, at best, maybe 20 seconds before he finally realizes that something's wrong, that it's somebody else under the mask. He doesn't know who Peter is, or Ben, or he doesn't know any of us from Adam, but he thinks he knows my style. This will work for a couple more moves. And he gets in like one or two, maybe even three good moves. Boom, boom, boom. You think he's done. All of a sudden, that's when Whiplash comes in. Have him say something about that A-tier stuff, right? Peter's able, or Peter, see, Spider-Man is Peter Parker. I would lose against Peter Parker because I'm thinking to move against Peter Parker. Ben Riley would kick my butt. But then have him go after Whiplash, take him down, and all of a sudden from, behind nowhere, boom, 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 Taskmaster just drops him just long enough to be able to put that collar on him. It's like, you're somebody new. But at this point, bud, I don't care who's under the mask. We'll figure it out when we scoop you off the ground with a spatula. That's when he just, this is Sparta's his ass out the freaking building. Great scene. Fantastic art. I looked at this and I was like, are they changing the Amazing Spider-Man comic? What's going on here? I was really impressed with so much that happened in this book. It was fantastic. Little things where some people being made to be amazing. Nobody's really punked out in this comic book. You know what I'm saying? Whiplash is, but F Whiplash. This was fantastic. When you look at the scenes with the Invisible Woman and Mr. Fantastic in the prison, and those other dudes come up, that fight scene, that love, that everything, I'm going to get choked up here in a moment, that amazing work that Zdarsky does with any member of the Fantastic Four, we could have that. We could have that all the time. If only he were put on the Fantastic Four book. But Marvel keeps denying us. Damn you, Marvel. That was just beautiful. I loved it. The final thing I want to talk about is what Kingpin's doing here. And that's actually where the Avengers Emperor Doom stuff comes into place. Comes into play. Because, without giving it away, Kingpin is basically trying to utilize Kilgrave's power. But Otto has a way to get out of being used, right? So now what this does is it poses a bit of a conundrum for us. We look at this and we say, okay, the first person who Kingpin, Fisk, tried this on was Otto Octavius, but it didn't work. We know the reason why. It was explained clearly, and it's cool, and it made Otto look like an absolute badass, which is amazing, because Otto is going to be used for something bigger, either in this book or someplace else. I love the idea that we're seeing seeds being planted in a comic book, because I happen to have a really awesome green thumb, and I have a really red middle finger. But like those things, being put aside, holy crap, I love what they did there. What could have made it better is if it left no doubt in our minds, unless Zardosky wanted us to have doubt that this was going to work. Sure, we saw the little purple letters when he spoke. But if we wanted to be sure that this does work against, whatever, regular people, why couldn't Otto have had a couple of his men there, right? Or Kingpin would have had some of his men there, just whatever. If there was somebody else in there. And when Fisk gave a command with the purple man's power, all of them obey. All of them heed his order, except for Otto, and he explains why. That would have been something where we'd be like, okay, well, it does work, but Otto's a badass. Okay, boom, and then there's no confusion. Because right now I'm wondering, is there a problem? Is there a kink in that machine, as it were? If yes, I'd really like to have understood it. If no, I'd really like that to have just been eliminated immediately and just taken off the table so that I understand what's going on as we move forward in the comic book. Those criticisms aside, this was a really good story. It's the way that Zardosky just kind of, I just bought a loom recently so I can learn how to weave. I've made a dice bag and I've made a scarf. I've actually connected two pieces of fabric together, two pieces of weaved stuff together. You know what I'm saying? And just I've got a scarf now. It's pretty. It'll work for the kids. All right. I'm proud of myself. One of these days I'll get around to doing little mittens and hats with pom-poms on top and whole clothes, so that when the end of the world happens, at least I'll still be well dressed. And yarn. Bite me. All you guys can be trying to raid Walmart like everybody else. Ooh. Anyway. Maybe it'd be the vampire apocalypse like DC. Either way, this was done very well. And the reason why I brought up my loom and the weaving in the first place is because that's the way that I see Zardosky writing a comic book. It's like, okay, I've got all of these ideas just spread all over the desk. What if I were to take this idea and this idea and this idea and put them together? Ooh, cool. What if I were to also, just off the top of my head, add in a this and a this? And that's really what I'm seeing in here. I'm seeing so many other stories that can branch out, right? Like roots on a tree or the branches or twigs or just tree references, okay? This was really good. I enjoyed this a lot. Guys, go and pick up this issue. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I'll talk to you guys later. Like the video and watch an ad. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.